President Cyril Ramaphosa's announcement last night about moving us to level 4 of the lockdown. Along with that announcement, confirmation that the sale of alcohol is prohibited for at least the 2 next weeks, could be longer. There are some signs there may be defiance of this for the first time. This morning, the Liquor Traders Forum saying they're considering defying the ban on the sale of alcohol. One political party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, has said that they will defy the regulations. Professor Ivor Sarakinsky is at the Wits School of Governance. Dr. Sam Cormier is the head of research at the Milpark Business School. Dr. Koma, if I may just start with you. Good afternoon to both of you, gentlemen. Dr. Koma, I think this is the first time we've seen organized formations, a business body, a political party, threatening this kind of defiance. What does this tell us about how people are feeling about lockdown regulations right now? All right, I don't think we have Dr. Koma with us. Let me put the same question then to you, Professor Sarakinsky. When we see organized bodies talking in this way, a political formation, a business formation, the Liquor Traders Forum, what does this tell us about how people are feeling about regulations?
Well, in terms of lockdown, everyone is exhausted and there's lockdown fatigue. But in terms of regulations, there's always been contestation around regulations and fights about compliance or not. So I think we're not in completely new terrain, but I think the stakes are just so much higher now.
Is one of the reasons the stakes are higher, it's not just people tired and frustrated about regulations and the thing I have to wear on my face, but there's also financial pressure. I mean, it's cumulative. You lose income for a month or two, well, that's terrible. You lose it for a year, you start to get more and more desperate. You're then told you have to shut up shop again. People are actually more financially desperate than they've ever been.
Yes, there's no question about that, and one has to take that into account, and one should certainly not ignore that. But again, when it comes to a matter like this, you've got duties and obligations from both sides. And I think we're starting to bear the consequences of those unrestrained, unrestricted lounge gatherings where people were socializing, drinking without masks, without social distancing. And the proprietors of those establishments did not comply with the regulations of the time. And of course, now we've got consequences, and those consequences have to be dealt with in terms of managing the rapid spread of COVID-19, in terms of the health of citizens, with public hospitals and even private hospitals being unable to cope. So there's no innocent parties here, and it's probably misleading to just blame government completely for this. I think that if the regulations in terms of minimal lockdown were complied with, we wouldn't have had to go back to such a severe set of measures as where we are now.
Dr. Sam Cormier, you joining us now, head of research at the Milpark Business School. Thank you for your time. You're on with Professor Ivor Sarakinsky, discussing the fact that there are now, for the first time, signs of sort of organized or defiance from organized organization, one the EFF, one the Liquor Traders Forum, against these regulations. There are many things to look at here. Do you think government's communicated the health case for these regulations strongly enough? We've had the experts speaking. We are in a situation where we have an acting health minister at the moment. She's been speaking. Do you think government's done enough communication on the need for these regulations?
Yes, thanks, Stephen, for having me. Basically, we need to look at this issue within the context of what we call a social contract. So, South African citizens will always expect the government to abide by the rule of law, and in turn, the government will expect citizens to also fully comply with the laws and the regulations. And it must be said that the legitimacy of the lockdown regulations, especially on alcohol, leaves much to be desired, because some of the law enforcement officials have been caught, some arrested and prosecuted for transporting alcohol using state and public resources while on duty. So full compliance of the regulations is being weakened, in part due to the conduct of police officers and the soldiers who, while on duty, expected to fully effect the enforcement of these regulations, have failed to do that. So the government should also own up to this situation in terms of failing to properly communicate its measures and policy response to managing this particular pandemic. So overall, I would say that the government has been seen to be inept, incompetent, and ineffective in properly managing the outbreak of this pandemic. So also issues around communication. Obviously, South Africans get worried when they follow the news reports that in the Eastern Cape, for example, you have a municipality that used COVID relief funds to purchase a luxury vehicle of a mayor. They also have issues with the 150 million rand which was awarded to digital vowed, where a portion of 3 million rand was used to link up media houses using a Zoom link. So this kind of inefficiencies and also issues related to failure to be seen to be effective and efficiently using public resources or public funds as part of managing this pandemic do lead to citizens, some being also, blatantly defying some of these regulations and the laws that have been put in place. But also we should take into account that majority of South Africans have experienced some form of authoritarian rule. For example, during apartheid rule that triggered public campaigns that were underlined by open defiance of the laws and also the regulations. And that is the reason recently we've seen public demonstrations, public protests regarding issues related to service delivery, but also you have political parties, as you said, who are also embarking on marches in defiance of government regulations. So it's a mess across the board.
Professor Zarikinsky, I mean, legitimacy, the word that Dr. Sam Cormier mentioned, I mean, that's vital to this. Has government undermined its own legitimacy? And I use government in the biggest sense of the word, by which I would include police officers, soldiers, people like that?
Yes, maybe public trust is a better way of capturing the problem here. Government, as I said, there are no innocent parties in all of this. In my earlier intervention, government hasn't strengthened its case with regard to the wastage and the misspending and the corruption involved in the spending of resources to manage the pandemic. And that has meant that resources that could be used to alleviate the suffering and hardship of people who bear the brunt of this new lockdown aren't available. And that means people are angry and they don't trust public institutions. They don't trust the decision to go for another lockdown for that. And that's perfectly understandable, and they have a case. But the hard reality is that if there isn't a lockdown, what's going to happen with the spread of this virus? So government, with limping along, has to do something in terms of breaking the cycle of the spread. And the experience is that these kinds of lockdowns do work, whether one likes it or not. And that's the decisions that's been made, and we've got to find the best way forward now, bearing in mind the pros and cons, the questionable behaviors of all the parties involved in these processes in terms of finding a way out of this. I think that's where a constructive conversation is best taken.
Dr. Koma, is there another issue here around consultation? I mean, the liquor industry, I think in some cases, is just simply angry. They feel that they haven't been listened to. Now, look, I don't know if you could ever convince the liquor industry that actually you need to ban their product for 2 weeks. And sometimes, if you know you can't change someone's mind, you shouldn't bother meeting with them because it just makes them angrier. But is there a failure of consultation here as well?
It is quite surprising that this time around, the Liquor Traders Forum or Association will lament lack of comprehensive consultation on this particular matter, because we have seen previously that the national government has been able to announce that there has been comprehensive and meaningful engagement with affected parties before it makes decisions and also publicly announce any of the adjusted levels as part of managing this crisis. But also bearing in mind that the Liquor Traders Association has already gone to court early this year, but we are yet to get a court ruling on this particular matter. So I'm quite surprised that why will they this time around raise the issue of lack of consultation. But we should also indicate that the Liquor Traders Forum basically is calling for a balancing act, a balancing of interest that takes into account the livelihoods of thousands of workers in the alcohol industry, looking at the economic impact and also efforts to save lives and also to combat this pandemic. So the issue of total ban on alcohol is what basically they are concerned about, because we know that this also triggers the illegal trade of alcohol through the black market, because our formal economy is paralleled with informal economy that is unregulated, is unorganized, there's no tax that is paid, and all of that. So these are the dynamics that should also be taken into account, and also the genuine concerns that are being raised by this particular stakeholder. That also has to be taken into account by the government, and I think the government should listen to the Liquor Traders Forum in this particular instance.
Professor Zarikinsky, how does government now deal with defiance, if there is defiance? And I realize it's going to take different forms. I mean, if one shop, one outlet or two outlets on one road are selling alcohol against the law, it's probably pretty easy to sort of crack down, close the shop, confiscate the alcohol, charge people with an offence for breaking lockdown regulations. If you've got 1,000 people in a mass march, well, that's a lot more difficult to do.
Absolutely. So enforcement is a challenge. And one of the ways to circumvent enforcement is to massify the resistance. It's a well-known tactic, and we did all of that in bringing down apartheid. It comes a point where you just can't put out all the fires. But there are perhaps some differences here. And the differences are that you can prosecute the leadership of the party and take them to court. And that's what's happened with regard to the Sputnik march led by the EFF. So there's a legal process that's underway there, and you can prosecute in that way. The other way is that you prosecute people who break the law and you remove their liquor licenses. And in that way you send out a clear message to others that their liquor licenses will be rescinded should they do the same as what others have done. And that's where these enterprises make their money, their profit. It's not from selling food, it's from the retailing of liquor to accompany food. And you use the regulatory power that you have to enforce the law. There's nothing illegal about the process of promulgating the lockdown and the ban on sale of alcohol. That will pass legal muster. And it's now a question of enforcing. And the cycle of the spread of the virus has to be broken. And warts and all, that's where we are. And that's how the process needs to unfold. Firm but fair enforcement and no use of unnecessary violence as we've seen in previous cases. That will further weaken the legitimacy and the public trust in this process.
Professor Ivor Sarakinsky at the Wits School of Governance, thank you very much indeed. Dr. Sam Cormier, sir, I do appreciate the time. Head of Research at the Milpark Business School.